What's your story about having a horrible gut feeling about a person or situation that turned out to be dead on? Story 1. I was at a party once at an apartment complex that is known for its sketchy tenants. I only knew a few people there, so I just stuck with one of my friends. Halfway through the party, a girl, I'll call her Sally, I met a few months back at a job, showed up with two guys who just seemed really shady, pushing drugs, feeding this girl tons of whiskey even though she was underage, and no one really knew who invited them. By 11 p.m., Sally was really screwed up. My friend and I leave to go to get beer and come back an hour later. Sally is on the floor in the back room, convulsing and foaming at her mouth. Her friends she showed up with refused me to allow her to take to the bath and make her throw up. Chaos ensues, and I leave. While walking back to my friend's apartment, I called 911 because I knew something was seriously wrong with her. The EMT showed up and take her to the hospital. 2 days later, she messages me on Facebook to tell me the doctors found multiple drugs in her system that she didn't choose to take. She suspects her friends but isn't sure. I'm positive it was them. 6 months later, a news article is posted. One of the sketchy guys was arrested for running a child trafficking business from a nearby hotel. So, basically, the second I saw these dudes show up, my acquaintance Sally, I knew something was fishy. And I was right. Those guys were crappy people. Story 2. My mother, around 9 to 10 years old at the time, was eating dinner with her family and someone knocked at the front door. Her dad, my grandfather, got up to answer it and it was a salesman. My grandfather politely declined whatever product he was selling and whatever spiel he was going to go on as they were having family dinner. The salesman was very aggressive in trying to continue speaking and even tried to invite himself inside their home. At that point, my usually level headed grandfather gets upset and says something along the lines of, "You need to leave now." Finally, the salesman gives up and proceeds to the next house, but not before my grandfather called the neighbors to warn them. The young female neighbor answered the phone and said she was home alone, so my grandfather told her to not answer the door whatsoever. Fast forward a few months, and the salesman turns out to be a serial killer targeting young women who were home by themselves and posing as a salesman. To sum it all up, my grandfather may have very well saved his neighbor's life. Always remind me to trust my gut when I get a bad feeling. Story 3. I gave birth in November to a baby girl who had a very rare neurological disorder. She hardly moved at all in utero, but when I told my doctors, they all said that every pregnancy and every baby is different, etc. I already have a healthy son. So I tried to put my worries to bed. We had a completely normal pregnancy, totally normal tests, no indication of trouble. Then she was born. The second she opened her eyes for the first time, I got a horrible, sinking feeling in my gut. There was no one there behind her eyes. We were still in the delivery room. There were pictures taken, and in every one I looked wary, scared. There were immediate problems. She didn't latch, she had no reflexes, etc., etc. I shoved all my worries down. She was born a few weeks early. Everyone kept saying, bottle feed her and she'll perk up once she gets closer to her due date. Every nurse, every doctor, every lactation consultant. We were released from the hospital with a healthy baby. Nope, nope, nope. A week later, we were back at the NYCU because she was still lethargic. She wasn't eating. It turns out she was basically brain dead the entire time. I didn't want to know, but I knew. I knew the moment I looked in her eyes. ETA, the diagnosis was Ohtahara syndrome, a catastrophic and fatal epilepsy disorder of infancy. No family history of seizures. A complete surprise, medically speaking. We took her home from the NYCU and she passed away in our arms at 16 days old. Story 4. There was a knock on the shared front door. The house was broken into 3 flats and I was the ground floor. I recognized the guy at the door as the boyfriend of the pretty little Asian woman who lived a couple of floors above us, and he smiled at me and asked if he could come in and wait for her at the hallway. Nice looking white guy, very upper middle class, with a tweed jacket and a posh accent. Good manners, winning smile. My stomach did a flip and I said no, shut the door in his face very abruptly. I had no idea why I reacted as badly as I did because I knew to say hi to, and I knew he spent the night in the building a lot. A couple of days later, I see her with her face swollen and purple where he had beaten her up to a pulp. Apparently, she had been in the hospital for a few days. She stopped me in the hallway and said if I ever saw the boyfriend again, I was to call the police. I'm guessing I subconsciously picked up on some nonverbal cue from when I saw them together. Story 5. This guy was a kindergarten teacher at my school. Everyone loved him. He was great with the kids, and his whole room was covered in SpongeBob stuff. Everyone wanted their kid in his class. He was close with a lot of the parents, and therefore their kids, outside the classroom. This might sound a bit odd, but it's not from where I'm from. Despite all this guy made me sick just looking at him. I would get really anxious around him, and when my friend said, "Let's go talk to Mr. X," I would make some excuse to stay away from him. I never could really figure out why I felt like this. Anyway, eventually he moved away with his wife, much to everyone's dismay. Probably 10 years later, it came out he had been arrested for possession of child porn, and he had also been in some of said pictures. It was really horrible for my whole community. I'm glad I felt off about him though and stayed away. Story 6. Years ago, I was in another state due to a family member being hospitalized. The hospital was very close to a sketchy rundown area, and my family and I had stopped to get gas. This guy in a hoodie walks up while I'm pumping gas and looking kinda out of it, hits me up for coffee money. I had a very bad feeling about him, and so not wanting to piss him off, I carefully gave him a bit of change I had in my pocket, explaining I wasn't carrying any cash on me, all the while watching him and all around to make sure I could scoot or do something if necessary. He thanked me and went on his way. A few days later, and back home, I saw his face on the news. He was arrested for killing a bunch of women and ditching the bodies in the nearby abandoned houses. Story 7. My sister had a boyfriend 10 years older than her. I didn't have a problem with the age gap, even though the fact that he had his first child when my sister was 13 kinda weirded me out. Age doesn't matter as much when you're adults, right? They weren't dating long, but she intentionally got pregnant 6 months into the relationship. I was really excited to meet him during a family trip, seeing as he's the father of my niece. Upon meeting him, I got a strange vibe from him and found myself anxious at the idea of being alone with him. He didn't do or say anything strange, though, and generally seemed like a nice guy. Still, when it was just me and him, I felt incredibly tense, like he would try to arm me at any moment. I stayed at my sister's place for a few days, then went home into the next province over. He added me on Facebook, and then I got a message saying he thought I was super cute and he wanted to get together. He literally tried to cheat on my sister with me. He tried to cheat on my sister who was 6 months pregnant. I didn't reply. I just took a screenshot of the message and sent it to my sister and my mom, asking my mom to look out for my sister since her boyfriend is a puddle of grease. After some issues, my sister is now a single mother. Story 8. There was actually a girl I grew up with who was loosely part of my greater social circle who always kinda creeped me out. I'd actually brought this up with some closer male friends and they seemed to agree. If you ask me to say why, I really can't even explain it. She was a bit ditzy, but friendly and overall just nice, never said a bad thing about anyone or found herself in any drama, but it was just like she was almost missing some human component. Anyways, we lost touch after high school, but a few years after that she had a kid, and a few years after that she got sent to prison for years for basically doing that Munchausen by proxy thing. She was poisoning her kid, and the doctors caught on, I guess. Luckily, the kid lived and is with a father who, by all measures, is a decent guy. I've told this story before, and it's really frustrating because I really can't articulate anything specific about her that gave me the creeps, but there it is. Story 9. My ex. She would constantly tell me things that seemed like they could be true with just enough details to make them believable, but were also just a little bit exaggerated, so it made her seem like her role in the story was more important or more unique. It always felt a little bit off, but she always had the benefit of plausible deniability on her side. One example, one morning I was waking up for work and she told me there was a huge screaming match at the neighbor's house where the two parents were fighting and making a scene. Her role in it was that she took their kids elsewhere while it was going on to keep them out of harm's way. The police were called and the man was escorted off to jail. Since I hadn't heard any of this going on, she just told me, yeah, you were out like a rock, which was quite possible. But it was all a fabrication just for her to have a story that made her seem interesting and important. Turns out she was a pathological liar and almost none of those things were true at all. My gut knew, but my brain reasoned the sense out of me. Story 10. My best friend's family was visiting. Best friend and her dad asked to see the new fossils I'd added to my collection, so I went upstairs to get them. Her dad was allergic to my guinea pig, who lived in my room. As I turned the corner, I noticed my younger brother, who I call Sean online, was wearing his pajamas. It was barely 9 p.m. Sean never went to bed that early. I asked him why he changed. Sean told me that he felt really sick and Dad had told him to go to bed and see if he felt better in the morning. Sean didn't look that sick, but something just felt off. I asked if Mom knew Sean didn't feel good. He said no, he just talked to Dad. That wasn't okay. And not because Mom would have been upset if nobody told her Sean didn't feel good. It felt more serious than that. Mom had to know Sean was sick. I started to flip out and snapped at Sean that he should never trust Dad's medical advice. Dad just tells people to sleep earlier and exercise more. Sean needed to tell Mom now. Sean very clearly thought I was overreacting. Heck, I thought I might be overreacting. But he went downstairs and told Mom he didn't feel good. First thing Mom did, as per usual, was check him for rashes. He had a red streak running from his thumb up to his armpit. Sean had severe blood poisoning. We found out later from the hospital he was 4 hours away from death. If I hadn't had such a strong feeling that Sean had to tell Mom that he didn't feel good, he wouldn't be alive today. He'd have died in his sleep that night. Did you ever have such a horrible gut feeling which turned out to be right? Let us know in the comments. Subscribe to the channel and I'll see you next time.